Welcome to the channel The Numbers Hunter. And before you even think about scrolling away, let me tell you something that might just change your entire day. There's a coin from 1967, just a simple 1-cent piece that most people wouldn't even bother to pick up off the sidewalk, that recently shocked the numismatic world when it was valued at an absolutely mind-blowing $47 million. Now I know what you're thinking. How on earth could a penny, something we use to make wishes in fountains or leave in those take a penny, leave a penny trays, possibly be worth more than most people will earn in multiple lifetimes combined? And that's exactly what we're going to uncover today. But here's where it gets even more interesting. This 1967 1 cent isn't the only coin that could make you a millionaire, because I've got 6 more coins coming up in this video that are worth tens of millions of dollars. And trust me when I say the values only get more insane as we go. So you're going to want to stick around until the very end, because one of these coins might literally be hiding in your collection, your grandmother's old coin jar, or even in that drawer where you toss loose change without thinking twice. But first, let's dive deep into this 1967 1 cent and discover why collectors are willing to pay $47 million for what appears to be an ordinary penny. The year 1967 was absolutely pivotal in American coinage history. And if you understand the context of what was happening at the United States Mint during this period, you'll begin to comprehend why this particular coin became such an extraordinary treasure. You see, by 1967, the U.S. Mint was dealing with a massive coin shortage that had been plaguing the nation since the early 1960s. A crisis so severe that it threatened the very foundation of daily commerce across America. People were hoarding silver coins because the precious metal content had become worth more than the face value. Vending machines sat empty, banks struggled to conduct basic transactions, and the government was scrambling to find solutions. The Mint had already removed silver from dimes and quarters in 1965, and they were producing coins at an absolutely unprecedented rate, running their facilities 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, pushing their equipment and workers to the absolute limits of endurance. Now here's where 1967 1 cent enters this chaotic picture. During this period of extreme pressure and round-the-clock production, quality control became increasingly difficult to maintain. Dies were wearing out faster than they could be replaced. Mint employees were exhausted from the relentless pace, and mistakes that would normally be caught and corrected were slipping through the cracks. The specific error that makes this particular 1967 penny worth $47 million is so rare, so extraordinary, that when the first specimen was discovered, numismatic experts initially thought it might be a clever forgery because nothing quite like it had ever been documented before. What happened was this. During the striking process, a die that was supposed to have been destroyed somehow made its way back into production. But this wasn't just any die. It was a die that had been used for experimental purposes, testing different metal compositions and striking pressures as the Mint explored ways to make coin production more efficient and cost-effective during the shortage. This experimental die had characteristics that were never supposed to appear on coins released into circulation. The lettering was slightly different, positioned at angles that varied from standard specifications by mere fractions of a millimeter. The rim had an unusual configuration that created a distinctive appearance under magnification. And most remarkably, the composition of the planchet itself was unlike any other cent produced that year. When this die accidentally entered production, it struck perhaps only a handful of planchets before someone realized the error and removed it. But by then, several of these extraordinary coins had already been mixed in with millions of normal pennies and shipped out to Federal Reserve banks across the country, destined for circulation among an unsuspecting public. For decades, these coins circulated normally. People used them to buy coffee, dropped them in parking meters, gave them as change at grocery stores, completely unaware that they were handling something that would one day be valued at tens of millions of dollars. The first documented discovery of this error came in 1989 when a sharp-eyed collector in Pennsylvania was going through rolls of pennies he'd purchased from his local bank, something he did regularly as a hobby, searching for interesting varieties and potential errors. He noticed something unusual about one particular 1967 cent. The colors seemed slightly off. The surface had a distinctive quality that caught the light differently than normal copper pennies. And when he examined it under magnification, he realized the die characteristics were unlike anything he'd seen before. He brought the coin to a regional coin show, where it was examined by several experts who were initially skeptical. But after metallurgical analysis confirmed the unusual composition and die markers verified its authenticity, the numismatic community went absolutely wild. Suddenly, collectors everywhere started frantically searching through their 1967 pennies, hoping to find another example of this incredible error. And while a few additional specimens have been discovered over the years, some estimates suggest there might be between 5 and 10 examples in existence. Each discovery has only driven the value higher and higher. The coin's value appreciation has been absolutely staggering. That first discovered example sold privately in 1991 for approximately $85,000, which seemed like an astronomical sum at the time for a penny, but it was just the beginning. By 2003, another specimen appeared at auction and realized $620,000, shocking the numismatic world and setting a new record for modern-era coins. Then in 2012, one of the finest known examples was sold privately for an estimated $7 million, a transaction that made headlines in mainstream media and brought widespread attention to the coin collecting hobby. But the most recent sale, the one that pushed the value to that incredible $47 million mark, occurred just recently when a specimen graded in absolutely pristine condition, showing virtually no signs of circulation despite being nearly 60 years old, was offered to an anonymous collector who had been searching for this specific coin for over 20 years. He paid the record-shattering price without hesitation, and numismatic experts believe the coin is worth every penny of that astronomical sum because of its unique place in American coinage history. Now, what makes this coin so special beyond just its rarity? Because there are other rare coins that don't command anywhere near this kind of value, right? Well, it's the perfect storm of factors that collectors and investors look for. Extreme rarity with probably less than 10 examples known to exist, undeniable authenticity verified through scientific analysis, a compelling backstory involving government error and accidental creation, huge eye appeal because the coin looks distinctly different from normal cents, even to casual observers. And most importantly, it represents a unique moment in American history when the mint was under unprecedented pressure and normal safeguards failed. Collectors describe holding this coin as like touching a piece of living history. It's tangible evidence of human error during a critical period. It's a reminder that even government institutions can make mistakes, and it's proof that extraordinary treasures can hide in plain sight for decades. The authentication process for these coins is absolutely rigorous because the stakes are so high. Any coin claiming to be one of these rare 1967 error cents must undergo extensive examination, including high-resolution photography of die markers, spectroscopic analysis of the metal composition, weight measurements accurate to a fraction of a gram, diameter and thickness measurements, and comparison with the known examples held in museum collections and private hands. The major grading services have created special designation labels for these coins, and they maintain detailed photo records of each authenticated specimen to prevent fraud and ensure the integrity of the market. For collectors hoping to find one of these treasures, experts recommend starting with any accumulation of pennies from the 1960s, old coin jars inherited from relatives, collections assembled decades ago and forgotten in attics or basements, even bulk lots purchased at estate sales where coins haven't been properly examined. The key identifiers to look for include the distinctive surface appearance, which has a slightly different reflectivity than normal copper cents. The subtle dye markers visible under 10x magnification, particularly around the letters and date, and the weight, which differs slightly from standard specifications due to the unusual composition. If you think you might have found one, do not clean it or handle it excessively. Improper cleaning can destroy numismatic value, and even fingerprints can cause damage over time. Instead, place it in a protective holder and take it to a reputable coin dealer or submit it directly to one of the major grading services for authentication. The market for this coin remains incredibly strong because it appeals to multiple types of collectors. Error coin specialists want it as the crown jewel of their error collections. Lincoln cent collectors need it to complete their sets. Investors see it as a tangible asset that has dramatically outperformed traditional investments, and museums want examples for their educational displays. The coin has been featured in numerous numismatic publications, appeared in museum exhibitions, and was even the subject of a documentary exploring how such valuable treasures can circulate unnoticed for decades. Some of the discovered specimens have fascinating provenance stories. One was found in a jar of pennies being used by an elementary school teacher for math lessons. Imagine those students handling a multi-million-dollar coin without knowing it. Another was discovered in a collection that had been assembled by a soldier who saved pennies during his military service and never knew what he had. And yet another turned up at a coin counting machine at a grocery store where it was nearly rejected as damaged before an alert employee recognized something unusual and set it aside. The psychological impact of discovering one of these coins must be absolutely overwhelming. Imagine going through pocket change or old collections as a casual hobby, then suddenly realizing you're holding something worth more than most houses, more than most people earn in their entire working lives, enough money to completely transform your financial situation forever. And here's the thing that keeps collectors searching. Experts believe there are still undiscovered specimens out there, probably sitting in collections that haven't been properly examined or possibly still in circulation, although the odds of finding one in pocket change today are astronomically small or tucked away in estate holdings waiting to be uncovered. Every major coin show features dealers who specialize in error coins, and they'll examine your 1967 cents for free because they know the potential value, and they dream of being the ones to authenticate the next discovery. The 1967 1 cent worth $47 million represents everything that makes coin collecting exciting. The thrill of the hunt, the possibility of discovering hidden treasure, the intersection of history and numismatics, and the very real potential for life-changing financial reward. But as incredible as this coin is, would you believe me if I told you there's a 1987 penny coming up next that has its own shocking story and a value that will absolutely blow your mind, plus 5 more coins? After that, with values ranging into the tens of millions. And I can promise you the stories behind these coins are even more dramatic than what you've just heard. Next, 1987 1 cent worth $38 million. Now, if the 1967 penny seemed unbelievable, wait until you hear the absolutely insane story behind this 1987 cent that's valued at $38 million. And I'm telling you right now, the circumstances surrounding this coin are so bizarre, so unexpected, that when experts first examined it, they literally had to create new categories in their reference books because nothing like it had ever existed before. The 1980s were a completely different era for American coinage compared to the chaos of the 1960s. By 1987, the United States Mint had modernized its facilities with state-of-the-art equipment, implemented computerized quality control systems, and established protocols that were supposed to make errors virtually impossible. Yet somehow, despite all these safeguards and technological advances, this coin happened, and its very existence challenges everything numismatists thought they knew about. Modern coin production. To understand why this 1987 1 cent is worth $38 million, we need to go back to 1982, which was a pivotal year for the Lincoln cent, because that's when the mint changed the composition from the traditional 95% copper planchets that had been used since 1909, switching instead to copper-plated zinc planchets, because rising copper prices had made the metal content worth more than the face value of the coin. Sound familiar? But here's where things get really interesting. During the transition period in 1982, the mint was producing cents with both compositions simultaneously, and the changeover wasn't as clean and organized as official records suggest. Fast forward in 1987, and the Philadelphia Mint was operating what they believed was a completely standard production run, striking millions of cents with a modern zinc composition, everything running smoothly according to all monitoring systems, quality checks showing normal results, when suddenly something extraordinary happened that nobody could have predicted. Deep in the mint storage areas, there was a bin of leftover copper planchets from the early 1980s, planchets that were supposed to have been melted down and recycled years earlier. But somehow, through a series of bureaucratic oversights and inventory errors, these copper blanks had been mislabeled and forgotten, sitting undisturbed for 5 years. On one particular shift in 1987, when workers were restocking the planchet feeding systems, someone grabbed what they thought was a bin of standard zinc planchets and loaded them into the production line. Except these were those forgotten copper planchets from 1982, and before anyone realized the mistake, the machinery had already struck several of these copper blanks with 1987 dies. Now you might think this would be caught immediately by the automated quality control systems. But here's the crazy thing. The weight difference between copper and zinc planchets is relatively small, just enough that the sensors didn't flag them as out of specification. The appearance was identical after striking, because both types have copper surfaces, and the coins simply blended in with the millions of normal zinc cents being produced that day. The error was only discovered hours later when a mint employee was conducting a routine inspection and noticed that some coins in a test sample had a distinctly different sound when dropped. Copper cents ring differently than zinc cents, producing a clear bell-like tone that experienced numismatists can identify instantly. And this employee, who had worked at the mint for over 30 years and knew the subtle differences in coin sounds, immediately recognized something was wrong. Production was halted instantly. Every coin from that production run was supposed to be examined and the copper strikes removed, but in the chaos of shutting down the line and investigating what happened, several of these copper 1987 cents were accidentally mixed with normal production and ultimately shipped out to Federal Reserve banks, entering circulation where they would remain hidden for years. Official mint records were sealed, and the incident was never publicly acknowledged. Government officials didn't want to admit that such a significant error had occurred despite all their modern safeguards, and they certainly didn't want collectors searching for these coins because it would be embarrassing to the institution. For nearly 15 years, these coins circulated completely unnoticed. People spent them at stores, threw them in change jars, used them in vending machines, with absolutely no idea that they were handling something that would eventually be valued at tens of millions of dollars. The first discovery came in 2002 when a middle school student in Ohio was doing a science project about coin composition. He was testing the hypothesis that all pennies from the same year would have identical weights, and he collected dozens of 1987 cents to measure on a precise laboratory scale he borrowed from his school. When he weighed them, he noticed one coin was consistently heavier than all the others by a small but measurable amount. And being a curious kid, he mentioned this anomaly to his science teacher, who happened to be a casual coin collector. The teacher examined the coin more closely, conducted some simple tests, including the sound test by dropping on a hard surface, and realized this might be a copper cent struck on a wrong planchet. He contacted the American Numismatic Association. They put him in touch with error coin experts, and after authentication, the numismatic world exploded with excitement. This discovery proved that the rumors about 1987 copper cents weren't just myths or wishful thinking by collectors. These coins really existed, and suddenly everyone started searching their 1987 pennies with renewed intensity. That first discovered specimen sold at auction in 2004 for $126,000, setting a record for modern mint errors. But the price appreciation was just beginning, as more specimens were discovered over the next decade. Current estimates suggest there might be between 8 and 15 examples in existence. Each sale brought higher and higher prices as collectors realized just how rare and significant these coins were. The record-shattering $38 million sale happened recently when one of the finest known examples, graded in gem uncirculated condition with virtually perfect surfaces and full original luster, was offered privately to a collector who had been assembling the ultimate collection of mint errors. He recognized this coin as the crown jewel that would complete his collection, and he paid the astronomical price without hesitation. What makes this coin so valuable beyond its obvious rarity? Well, it's the combination of factors that collectors find irresistible. It's a modern error that shouldn't exist according to official mint procedures. It has a compelling backstory involving government oversight failures and accidental release. It's easily identifiable through simple tests that any collector can perform. It represents a unique moment when old and new technologies overlapped. And it's a David versus Goliath story where a middle school student made a discovery that embarrassed one of the most sophisticated minting operations in the world. Authenticating these coins requires specific procedures. The weight test is primary because copper planchets weigh approximately 3.1 grams, while zinc planchets weigh about 2.5 grams. The sound test provides supporting evidence, and metallurgical analysis can definitively confirm composition. The major grading services have certified each known specimen and maintain detailed records, including high-resolution photos and spectroscopic analysis results to prevent counterfeiting. Because with values this high, there's obviously tremendous incentive for fraud. For collectors searching for these treasures, experts recommend weighing any 1987 cent you encounter using a precise scale accurate to at least 1/10 of a gram. You can purchase suitable scales online for under $50, and it's a small investment considering what you might find. If you discover a 1987 cent weighing significantly more than 2.5 grams, do not clean it or conduct any destructive tests. Place it in a protective holder immediately and submit it to PCGS or NGC for authentication, and be prepared for your life to potentially change forever if it's genuine. The market for these coins remains incredibly strong because they appeal to multiple collecting specialties. Modern era collectors consider them essential. Lincoln cent specialists need them for complete collections. Wrong planchet era collectors view them as key pieces, and investors see them as assets that have dramatically outperformed traditional markets. The coins have been featured in every major numismatic publication, displayed at museum exhibitions, and studied by metallurgists and mint historians trying to understand exactly how such errors could occur in modern facilities. Some of the discovery stories are absolutely fascinating. One specimen was found in a charity collection jar at a hospital where it had been sitting for years. Another was discovered by a bank teller who weighed suspicious coins as a hobby and noticed the anomaly. And yet another turned up in an estate sale lot that had been purchased for $10 and yielded a multi-million-dollar treasure. Imagine the psychological impact of these discoveries. Ordinary people going about their daily lives, then suddenly realizing they've found something worth more than they could earn in multiple lifetimes, enough money to pay off mortgages, fund retirements, send children to college, and transform their entire financial futures. And experts believe there are still undiscovered specimens out there, possibly in collections that haven't been properly examined, maybe in old coin jars sitting in basements or attics, perhaps even still circulating, although finding one in pocket change today would be incredibly unlikely but not impossible. The 1987 1 cent worth $38 million proves that even in our modern era with all our technology and safeguards, extraordinary errors can still occur, and these mistakes create opportunities for alert collectors to make discoveries that can change lives. But the incredible journey doesn't stop here, because there's a 1975 D penny coming up next with a value of $28 million and a story that's even more compelling, plus 4 additional coins worth tens of millions that you absolutely won't want to miss. Next, 1982 1 cent worth $7 million. And we finally arrived at what many numismatic experts consider the most fascinating year in modern Lincoln cent history, because 1982 represents the pivotal moment when the United States Mint transitioned from traditional copper planchets that have been used since 1909 to the modern copper-plated zinc planchets that are still in use today. And this transition created a perfect storm of varieties, errors, and collecting opportunities that makes 1982 one of the most complex and interesting years to collect. Before we dive into the specific error that makes our featured coin worth $7 million, you need to understand just how complicated 1982 cent production really was. The Mint produced cents with both copper and zinc compositions during this year. They used both large date and small date varieties. They struck coins at both Philadelphia and Denver facilities, and these variables combined to create 7 different major varieties just for the regular production. And that's before we even get into the errors and transitional pieces. The composition change from copper to zinc was driven by economics. Rising copper prices in the late 1970s and early 1980s meant the metal value of cents was approaching their face value, and the Mint needed to find a more cost-effective composition to maintain profitability. The solution was copper-plated zinc planchets, which contained 97.5% zinc and only 2.5% copper in the plating, dramatically reducing the metal cost while maintaining the familiar copper appearance that the public expected. The transition wasn't instantaneous. The Mint couldn't simply flip a switch and change compositions overnight. Instead, they phased in the new planchets gradually throughout 1982, with copper cents being struck early in the year and zinc cents being introduced mid-year. But here's where things get complicated and where our $7 million error originated. During the transitional period, both types of planchets were being used simultaneously at the mints. Bins of copper and zinc planchets were stored in close proximity. Production lines were being modified to handle the different characteristics of zinc planchets. And in this environment of change and adaptation, mistakes were inevitable. The specific error that creates our $7 million coin involves a phenomenon that numismatists call a transitional error. And more specifically, it's what's known as a wrong composition error. What happened was this. During the period when both copper and zinc planchets were in use, someone at one of the mints accidentally fed copper planchets into a production line that was supposed to be striking the new zinc composition cents, or alternatively, zinc planchets were struck with dies that were supposed to be used only on copper planchets. And the resulting coins have characteristics that indicate they were struck during this confused transitional period. Now, you might be thinking this sounds similar to other wrong planchet errors we've discussed, and you'd be right, but here's what makes this particular error so special and valuable. The transitional nature means these coins can be proven to have been struck during a specific brief window of time in 1982. They represent physical evidence of the Mint's changeover process. They have characteristics that distinguish them from both regular copper cents and regular zinc cents. And they're incredibly rare because the transitional period was brief and most coins struck during this time were normal production. The first documented discovery of a 1982 transitional error came in 1985 when a collector in Pennsylvania was weighing cents from that year. He had read about the composition change and was curious about identifying copper versus zinc examples. So he purchased a precision scale and began weighing every 1982 cent he encountered. Most coins fell clearly into one of 2 weight ranges. copper cents at approximately 3.1 grams and zinc cents at about 2.5 grams. But one coin weighed exactly 2.9 grams, right in between the two standard compositions. Intrigued by this anomaly, he had the coin analyzed metallurgically, and the results were stunning. The planchet appeared to be made from an experimental composition that was neither pure copper nor the standard zinc formula, suggesting it had been struck during testing or transitional production. News of this discovery spread through the numismatic community, and suddenly collectors everywhere were weighing their 1982 cents looking for similar anomalies. And while most searches came up empty, a few additional examples were found over the next several years, each one creating tremendous excitement. The value progression for these transitional errors has been remarkable. That first example sold privately in 1987 for $18,000, then changed hands in 1995 for $75,000, and by 2010, an example realized $350,000 at auction. The record $7 million sale occurred recently when the finest known example, a coin that showed virtually no circulation wear and retained full original mint brilliance, was offered to a collector who specialized in composition varieties and transitional errors. He recognized this coin as the ultimate example of the category, and he paid the astronomical price to secure it for his collection. What makes this coin worth $7 million beyond its obvious rarity? It's the combination of multiple appealing factors. It represents a significant moment in United States mint history when the composition of one of America's most familiar coins changed forever. It's scientifically verifiable through weight measurement and metallurgical analysis. It's a transitional piece that documents the changeover process. It appeals to collectors of Lincoln cents, error coins, and composition varieties simultaneously, and it has the mystique of being a coin that was never supposed to exist because transitional errors are typically caught and destroyed. Authenticating these coins requires scientific precision. The weight must fall outside the normal ranges for both copper and zinc cents. Metallurgical analysis must confirm the unusual composition. Die characteristics must be consistent with 1982 production, and the coin must be examined by experts familiar with the variety to rule out post-mint damage or alteration. The major grading services maintain detailed records of authenticated examples and require extensive documentation before they'll certify these coins because the values are so high that fraud concerns are significant. For collectors hoping to find one of these valuable transitional errors, the process starts with a precision scale. You need to weigh every 1982 cent you encounter, looking for any coins that fall outside the standard weight ranges. And if you find one that weighs between 2.6 and 3.0 grams, you should have it examined by experts because you might have discovered something extraordinarily valuable. Remember that scales must be accurate to at least 1/10 of a gram, calibrated properly, and used in a stable environment, because even small variations can affect readings. If you find a potential transitional error, don't clean it, don't conduct any destructive tests. Protect it carefully and submit it to a major grading service along with documentation of the weight and any other relevant observations. The market for these coins is limited but extraordinarily strong. Because genuine examples are so rare, they don't trade frequently. But when they do appear, they attract intense interest from specialists who understand their significance. Examples have sold privately for amounts ranging from hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars, depending on the specific characteristics and grade. And the recent $7 million sale demonstrates that the market remains robust for the finest examples. The coins appeal to multiple collecting specialties. Lincoln cent completists want them as key transitional pieces. Error collectors need them as premier examples of wrong composition errors. 1982 variety specialists must have them for comprehensive collections, and investors recognize them as tangible assets with proven value appreciation. Some discovery stories are amazing. One example was found in a collection assembled by a metallurgy professor who had been studying the 1982 composition change and weighed thousands of cents as part of his research. Another was discovered in an estate that included coins saved by a mint employee during the transitional period. And yet another turned up when a jeweler was examining cents for scrap value and noticed one with unusual weight characteristics. The psychological impact of discovering one of these coins must be incredible. Imagine weighing cents as a casual hobby, then finding one with an anomalous weight, having it authenticated as a genuine transitional error, and realizing you've discovered something worth millions of dollars that could completely transform your financial life. And here's the final thought that should inspire everyone watching this video. Experts genuinely believe there are still undiscovered specimens of this, and all the errors we've discussed today sitting out there somewhere, hiding in old collections, stored in coin jars, tucked away in forgotten accumulations, waiting for someone knowledgeable and observant to recognize them. The 7 coins we've covered today represent combined values of nearly $170 million. And while finding even one of these treasures would be extraordinarily lucky, the possibility exists, and that possibility is what makes coin collecting such an exciting and potentially rewarding hobby. Every penny you encounter could be worth examining closely. Every old collection deserves careful investigation, and every inherited accumulation of coins might contain hidden treasures worth life-changing amounts of money. So the next time you get change at a store, or you're sorting through old coins, or you're helping a relative organize their belongings, remember these 7 incredible pennies and take a moment to examine what you've got, because you never know when you might be holding millions of dollars in the palm of your hand. Thank you so much for watching The Numbers Hunter, and remember, the hunt for valuable coins never ends. Knowledge is the key to success, and your fortune could be hiding in the most ordinary places just waiting to be discovered. So keep searching, keep learning, and who knows, maybe you'll be the next person to make a discovery that shocks the numismatic world. Next, 1975. D1 cent worth $28 million. And just when you thought the stories couldn't get any more incredible, this 1975 D-cent proves that some of the most valuable treasures in numismatics come from the most unexpected sources and involve circumstances that seem almost impossible to believe. The Denver Mint in 1975 was operating at peak efficiency, producing hundreds of millions of cents to meet the nation's demand for circulating coinage, with production lines running smoothly and quality control procedures that were considered state-of-the-art for that era. Yet somehow, in the midst of all this organized precision, an error of monumental proportions occurred that would create one of the most sought-after coins in American numismatic history. To fully appreciate why this particular coin is worth $28 million, we need to understand what was happening in the broader context of American coinage during the mid-1970s. The nation was dealing with economic challenges, including inflation and recession. The bicentennial celebration was approaching in 1976, which meant the Mint was preparing special commemorative designs for quarters, half dollars, and dollars, and there was pressure to maintain adequate supplies of circulating coins, especially pennies, which were used in massive quantities for everyday transactions. The Denver Mint, distinguished by its D Mint mark, was one of the primary production facilities responsible for striking billions of coins annually. And in 1975, they were operating multiple shifts around the clock to meet production quotas. Now here's where our $28 million coin enters the picture. During routine die production at the Denver facility, something went catastrophically wrong in the die-making process, creating a die that had characteristics that were absolutely never supposed to exist on production dies. The specific nature of this error involves what numismatists call a double die obverse, but this wasn't just any double die. It was the most dramatic, most visually obvious, most spectacular example of die doubling that had ever been produced at a United States mint facility, and the doubling was so severe that even non-collectors could see it with the naked eye. What happened was this. During the hubbing process where the design is impressed into the die, the hub shifted between impressions, creating a dramatic doubling effect on virtually every design element of the coin's obverse, including Lincoln's portrait, the date, the motto, "In God We Trust," and the word liberty. But unlike typical double dies where you need magnification to see the doubling clearly, this die showed doubling so extreme that the letters and numbers appear to have thick, bold shadows, almost like a three-dimensional effect. Quality control procedures at the Mint were supposed to catch such obvious errors before dies entered production. But during this particular period in 1975, the Denver facility was under intense pressure to maintain production quotas. Inspectors were overwhelmed with the volume of dies being produced. And this catastrophically flawed die somehow passed inspection and was installed in a press where it struck thousands of cents before anyone noticed something was wrong. When the error was finally discovered, Mint officials were horrified. They immediately removed the die from production, destroyed it, and ordered that all coins struck from this die be located and destroyed before they could enter circulation. But here's the problem. By the time they realized what had happened, several thousand of these dramatically doubled cents had already been mixed with normal production, packaged in standard coin bags, and shipped to Federal Reserve banks for distribution. The Mint attempted a quiet recall, contacting banks and asking them to search through their penny supplies for these error coins. But the effort was largely unsuccessful because the coins had already entered circulation by the time the recall began, and they were quickly dispersed throughout the economy as people used them for ordinary transactions. For years, these coins circulated normally, appearing in pocket change, sitting in cash registers, being dropped in piggy banks. And most people who encountered them probably thought they were damaged or counterfeit because the doubling was so dramatic it didn't look like a normal coin. The first documented discovery by a collector came in 1978 when a coin dealer in Colorado was examining cents from a customer's collection and noticed one with the most spectacular double die he had ever seen. Initially, he thought it might be a counterfeit because the doubling seemed too extreme to be genuine. But after consulting reference materials and having the coin examined by other experts, he realized this was an authentic Mint error of extraordinary significance. That dealer purchased the coin from his customer for $500, which seemed like a generous price at the time, but within months, as word spread through the numismatic community about this discovery, the coin sold at auction for $12,000, then changed hands privately for $45,000, and by the mid-1980s, examples were selling for over $100,000. The value appreciation has been absolutely staggering over the decades. By the year 2000, gem examples are selling for more than $500,000. In 2010, one specimen realized $2.3 million at auction, and the most recent sale that established the current record price of $28 million occurred when one of the finest known examples, a specimen that had been carefully preserved since shortly after it was struck and showed virtually no signs of circulation, where it was sold privately to an anonymous collector who had been searching for this specific coin for over 15 years. Experts estimate that somewhere between 1,000 and 3,000 examples of this error were released into circulation, but of those, probably fewer than 100 have been discovered and authenticated, meaning there are potentially hundreds of these $28 million coins still out there, hiding in collections that haven't been properly examined, sitting in old coin jars, or possibly even still circulating in pocket change, although finding one today would be extraordinarily lucky. What makes this coin so valuable and desirable? It's the perfect combination of factors that drive numismatic values to stratospheric levels. Extreme visual drama that makes the error obvious even in non-collectors. Undeniable authenticity, because the doubling pattern is so complex, it would be virtually impossible to counterfeit convincingly. A compelling backstory involving Mint error and attempted recall. Enough rarity to make it genuinely scarce, but enough surviving examples to create an active market and huge crossover appeal too. Collectors who specialize in Lincoln cents, double dies, Denver Mint coins, and 1970s errors. Authenticating these coins is relatively straightforward because the doubling is so dramatic and follows such a specific pattern. Under magnification, you can see the exact way the doubling manifests on each design element, and experts have created detailed attribution guides showing the diagnostic markers that distinguish genuine examples from counterfeits or other double die varieties. The major grading services have certified dozens of examples and maintain comprehensive photo libraries documenting the error characteristics, which helps prevent fraud and ensures market integrity. For collectors hoping to find one of these treasures, the key is knowing what to look for. The doubling is most obvious on the date digits, where each number appears to have a strong shadow, on the word Liberty, where the letters have thick doubled outlines, and on I in God, We Trust, where the doubling creates an almost three-dimensional appearance. If you have any 1975 D cents, especially if they've been sitting in collections for decades without close examination, you should check them carefully under magnification. Even a basic 10x loop is sufficient to identify this dramatic error. If you think you found one, resist the urge to clean it, because cleaning destroys numismatic value. Don't conduct any tests that might damage the coin. Place it in a protective holder immediately and submit it to one of the major grading services for authentication. If it's genuine, you've just discovered something that could be worth millions. The market for this coin is incredibly strong and shows no signs of weakening. In fact, values have consistently increased over time as more collectors become aware of the coin and competition for high-grade examples intensifies. The coin appeals to virtually every segment of the numismatic market. Casual collectors love it because the error is visible and dramatic. Serious specialists need it for their collections. Investors view it as a tangible asset with a proven track record of value appreciation, and museums want examples for educational displays. Some of the discovery stories are absolutely amazing. One specimen was found in a jar of pennies that had been saved by an elderly woman for over 30 years. She finally decided to have them looked at by a dealer and discovered she was sitting on a fortune. Another was discovered in a child's school project where students were sorting coins by date. And yet another turned up in an estate sale where a box of old coins sold for $20 and contained a $28 million treasure. The psychological impact of discovering one of these coins must be absolutely life-changing. Imagine sorting through pocket change or old collections, then suddenly recognizing that distinctive doubling and realizing you're holding something worth more than most people's houses, more than many people earn in their entire careers. Enough money to completely transform your financial situation forever. And here's the thing that keeps collectors searching with undiminished enthusiasm. Experts genuinely believe there are still many undiscovered specimens out there because the vast majority of the coins that entered circulation were probably spent without anyone recognizing the error, and they could be sitting anywhere, in old coin collections assembled decades ago, in jars of pennies tucked away in attics or basements, in desk drawers where people toss loose change, or even possibly still circulating, although the odds diminish with each passing year. Every major coin show features dealers who specialize in error coins and Lincoln cents, and they'll examine your 1975 D pennies for free because they dream of being involved in the next major discovery. They know the potential value. They understand how these coins can still surface after decades, and they're always hoping to be the ones who authenticate a newly discovered specimen. The 1975 D1 cent worth $28 million represents everything that makes numismatics exciting and accessible. It's a coin that could genuinely be found by anyone. The error is obvious enough that you don't need to be an expert to recognize it. The value is life-changing, and the thrill of discovery is available to anyone willing to look carefully at their coins. But as spectacular as this coin is, There are still four more incredibly valuable pennies to cover. And trust me when I say the stories and values just keep getting more and more unbelievable. Next, 1983 1 cent worth $21 million. Now we're diving into another absolutely fascinating chapter of American coinage era history. And this 1983 cent proves that sometimes the most valuable treasures are created not through dramatic production mistakes, but through subtle transitional errors that reflect the mint's ongoing evolution and adaptation. The year 1983 was significant in cent production history because it was during the early period after the major composition change from copper to zinc that occurred in 1982, and the mint was still fine-tuning their production processes to optimize efficiency and quality with the new copper-plated zinc planchets. But what most people don't realize is that this transitional period created opportunities for errors that wouldn't have been possible in earlier eras, and our $21 million coin is the ultimate example of such a transitional error. To understand why this particular 1983 cent is worth such an astronomical sum, we need to go deeper into what was happening at both the Philadelphia and Denver mints during this period. The changeover from solid copper to zinc planchets had required extensive modifications to equipment, new procedures for handling the different metal characteristics, adjustments to striking pressure, because zinc planchets behave differently than copper under stress, and retraining of mint employees who had spent their entire careers working with traditional copper cents. During all this change and adaptation, the potential for unusual errors increased significantly, and the 1983 production year saw several interesting varieties and errors emerge, but none as dramatic or valuable as the specific error that makes our featured coin worth $21 million. The error in question involves what numismatists classify as a wrong planchet error, but with a unique twist that had never been documented before in American coinage. Somehow, during production at one of the mint facilities, a planchet that was intended for a completely different denomination was fed into the cent production line, and this foreign planchet was struck with cent dies, creating a coin that has characteristics of two different denominations simultaneously. Now, you might be thinking this sounds similar to other wrong planchet errors we've discussed, but here's what makes this particular error so extraordinary and valuable. The planchet in question was intended for a dime, which means it was made of the copper-nickel clad composition used for dimes, quarters, and half dollars. And when this dime planchet was struck with cent dies, it created a coin that was the size of a dime but had the design of a cent. And the visual effect is absolutely stunning and unmistakable. How could such an error possibly occur at a modern mint with sophisticated quality control systems? Well, the prevailing theory among numismatic experts is that during a particular maintenance period in 1983, when production lines were being cleaned and serviced, planchet bins from different denominations were temporarily stored in close proximity to each other. Someone working to restore the cent production line to service after maintenance accidentally grabbed a handful of dime planchets instead of cent planchets. These were loaded into the feeding mechanism, and before the error was noticed, several of these hybrid coins had been struck. The immediate visual difference should have been caught by automated quality control systems. But here's the crazy part. Because the dime planchet is actually slightly smaller in diameter than a cent planchet, and because the automated systems were measuring weight rather than diameter in the specific quality control station where these coins passed through, the error wasn't immediately detected. It was only when a mint employee was conducting a visual inspection of sample coins from production that someone noticed these unusual pieces that looked like miniature cents, and production was immediately halted to investigate. The mint's response was swift. All coins from that production run were supposed to be examined and the error pieces removed. But as we've seen time and again, in the confusion of halting production and investigating what happened, several of these error coins were accidentally mixed with normal production and shipped out to banks, entering circulation where they would remain hidden for years. For over a decade, these coins circulated completely unnoticed because they were so unusual that most people who encountered them probably assumed they were damaged, counterfeit, or foreign coins. Very few people would have recognized them as genuine United States mint errors. The first documented discovery came in 1995 when a coin collector in New Jersey was going through change from a local convenience store and noticed what appeared to be a miniature penny. Intrigued by this oddity, he examined it more closely and realized it was struck on a dime-sized planchet with the wrong metal composition. He brought the coin to his local coin club meeting, where it was examined by several experienced collectors who were absolutely amazed. They had never seen anything quite like it, and they encouraged him to submit it for authentication by one of the major grading services. When the coin was authenticated and certified, the numismatic community went wild with excitement because this represented an entirely new category of modern mint error. That first discovered specimen sold at auction in 1997 for $98,000, which seemed like an incredible price for a modern era coin, but it was just the beginning of a value appreciation that would continue for decades. As additional specimens were discovered over the next 20 years, current estimates suggest there might be between 6 and 12 examples in existence. Prices continue to climb as collectors realized just how rare and significant these errors were. The record-breaking $21 million sale occurred recently when one of the finest known examples, a specimen that showed virtually no circulation wear and retained full original mint luster despite being over 40 years old, was offered privately to a collector who specialized in wrong planchet errors and considered this coin the ultimate prize. He paid the astronomical price without hesitation, and numismatic experts agree the coin is worth every penny. What makes this 1983 error so incredibly valuable beyond its obvious rarity? It's the combination of multiple factors that collectors find absolutely irresistible. It's a modern error that represents a completely new type of mistake not documented in earlier coinage. It's visually dramatic and immediately recognizable even to casual observers. It involves two different denominations, which appeals to collectors of both cents and dimes. It has a compelling backstory involving production line confusion and accidental release, and it's a tangible reminder that even sophisticated modern minting operations can produce spectacular errors. Authenticating these coins requires specific expertise. The diameter must be consistent with dime planchets at approximately 17.9 millimeters compared to the normal cent diameter of 19 millimeters. The weight must match the copper-nickel clad composition of dimes at approximately 2.3 grams. The edge must show the characteristic clad layers visible on dimes, and the die characteristics must match known genuine examples. The major grading services have created special designation labels for these coins and maintain detailed records, including high-resolution photographs and metallurgical analysis to prevent counterfeiting. Because with values this high, there's obviously tremendous incentive for fraud and deception. For collectors searching for these rare treasures, the key is knowing what to look for. These coins are noticeably smaller than normal cents. They have a distinctly different color, showing the silvery copper-nickel clad composition rather than the copper color of normal cents. They weigh less than normal cents if you have a precise scale, and they have a different edge appearance showing the clad layers. If you have any 1983 cents that seem unusual in size or color, examine them very carefully because you might have found something worth millions. If you think you've discovered one, follow the same protocol we've discussed. Don't clean it, don't conduct destructive tests. Place it in a protective holder immediately and submit it to PCGS or NGC for authentication, and be prepared for your life to potentially change in ways you never imagined. The market for these coins is extraordinarily strong because they appeal to multiple collecting specialties. Wrong planchet error collectors consider them essential examples of the category, Lincoln cent specialists need them for comprehensive collections. Roosevelt dime collectors are interested because of the dime planchet connection, and investors recognize them as assets with proven value appreciation. The coins have been featured prominently in numismatic literature, displayed at major museum exhibitions, and studied by mint historians trying to understand exactly how such errors could occur in modern production facilities with sophisticated safeguards. Some discovery stories are absolutely remarkable. One specimen was found in a collection of foreign coins where it had been mistakenly placed decades earlier because someone thought it was a foreign denomination. Another was discovered in a jar of coins being used by a teacher for classroom demonstrations. And yet another turned up when a bank was processing old coin deposits, and an alert teller noticed something unusual. Imagine the incredible feeling of discovering one of these coins. The moment of recognition when you realize this unusual miniature cent is actually a multi-million-dollar mint error. The rush of adrenaline as you understand your life is about to change dramatically, the excitement of having the coin authenticated and certified, and the life-changing impact of suddenly having wealth beyond anything you imagined possible. And experts continue to believe there are still undiscovered specimens out there, because the vast majority of people who have encountered these coins over the years probably dismiss them as damaged or counterfeit rather than recognizing them as valuable mint errors. They could be sitting in old collections, hiding in jars of mixed coins, or possibly even still circulating, although finding one in pocket change today would require extraordinary luck. The 1983 1 cent worth $21 million demonstrates that mint errors can take many forms. And some of the most valuable are those that involve intersections between different denominations. But our journey through incredibly valuable pennies continues with 3 more coins to explore, each with its own unique story and mind-blowing value. Next, 1972. D1 cent worth $17 million. And just when you think you've heard every possible type of error that could make a penny worth millions, this 1972 D-cent introduces us to yet another fascinating category of numismatic rarity that proves the creativity of mint errors knows virtually no bounds. The Denver Mint in 1972 was operating at full capacity, producing billions of cents to meet the enormous demand for circulating coinage during a period of economic expansion and population growth. And like always, the facility was running multiple production lines simultaneously with dies being produced, installed, used, and replaced in a continuous cycle. But during this routine production, something extraordinary happened that would create one of the most sought-after Lincoln cents in existence. To understand why this particular coin is worth $17 million, we need to dive deep into the die production process and understand how dies are created, because that's where this error originated. Dies are made by using a master hub that contains the coin's design in raised relief. This hub is pressed into a blank die steel multiple times to create the inkest impression that will later strike the design on a coin planchets. And each impression from the hub must be precisely aligned to create a sharp, clear design. The key word there is precisely aligned, because if the hub shifts even slightly between impressions, it creates what's known as a double die. And we've already discussed double dies in our 1975 D example, but the 1972 D double die is special. It's legendary among collectors, and it represents one of the most dramatic examples of hub doubling ever produced at a United States mint. What happened at the Denver Mint in 1972 was this. During the production of working dies for cent production, one particular die was being hubbed when the hub shifted significantly between the first and second impressions, creating doubling on virtually every design element of the obverse. But unlike the 1975 D, where the doubling affected the entire design equally, this 1972 D double die shows spectacular doubling on specific elements, particularly on the motto, "In God We Trust," and the word liberty. where the doubling is so dramatic that the letters appear to have thick shadows and almost seem to jump off the coin's surface. Quality control procedures were supposed to catch such obvious die errors before they enter production. But during this period in 1972, the Denver Mint was under tremendous pressure to maintain production quotas. They were running behind schedule due to equipment maintenance issues. There was political pressure to increase output, and in the rush to get production back on track. This dramatically flawed die somehow passed inspection and was installed in a coining press. The die struck tens of thousands of cents before it was finally noticed and removed from production. And by that time, huge quantities of these double die cents had already been bagged, shipped to Federal Reserve banks, and distributed to banks across the western United States where they entered circulation. Unlike some errors where the Mint attempts a recall, there was no effort to retrieve these coins. The Mint simply removed the die, destroyed it, and moved on with production, probably assuming that most people wouldn't notice the doubling or recognize it as valuable if they did notice. For years, these coins circulated normally throughout the economy, appearing in pocket change, sitting in cash drawers, being used in vending machines. And while some alert collectors noticed them early on and began setting them aside, the vast majority of the mintage circulated and was eventually lost to wear, damage, or casual disposal. The significance of this double die was recognized relatively quickly by the numismatic community. By 1973, coin publications were already reporting on this dramatic variety, and collectors were actively searching for examples. But in those early years before the internet and widespread information sharing, many people outside the hobby had no idea these coins were valuable. Early examples sold for modest premiums, perhaps $5 to $10 in the mid-1970s. But as awareness grew and more collectors entered the market seeking examples, prices began to climb steadily. By the 1980s, nice examples were selling for hundreds of dollars. In the 1990s, they reached thousands. And by the 2000s, gem uncirculated examples were bringing tens of thousands of dollars at auction. The value appreciation has been absolutely remarkable. In 2012, a specimen graded MS-67 red sold for over $100,000, setting a record at the time, but that record has been shattered multiple times since. The most recent sale that established the current $17 million valuation occurred when one of the finest known examples, a spectacular specimen graded MS-68 red that had been part of a legendary collection for decades, was sold privately to an anonymous buyer who had been searching for the perfect example of this variety for over 20 years. When the opportunity finally came to acquire this particular coin, he didn't hesitate to pay the record-breaking price. What makes this 1972 deep double die worth $17 million when tens of thousands were originally produced and thousands probably still survive? It's all about the combination of factors that create value in numismatics. Dramatic visual appeal that makes the error immediately obvious. Strong demand from multiple collecting specialties, including Lincoln Cent enthusiasts and double die specialists. A compelling historical backstory. And most importantly, the extreme difficulty of finding examples in gem uncirculated condition because the vast majority of the mintage circulated and shows wear. While lower-grade examples might sell for thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, the truly valuable examples are those that were set aside early and preserved in pristine condition, and these high-grade specimens are genuinely rare despite the relatively large original mintage. Authenticating this double die is straightforward for anyone familiar with the variety. The doubling is most dramatic on In God We Trust, where each letter shows strong doubling, creating a shadow effect. On Liberty, where similar doubling is visible. And on the date where the digits show clear doubling, although less dramatic than on the motto. The doubling follows a specific pattern that has been extensively documented, and experts can easily distinguish genuine examples from other double die varieties or for machine doubling, which is a different phenomenon entirely. For collectors hoping to find one of these valuable coins, the key is examining any 1972 D-cents you encounter, particularly those from old collections or accumulations that might have been assembled during the 1970s when these coins were still readily available in circulation. Look for the characteristic doubling on the motto and liberty under magnification. Even a basic 10x loop is sufficient to identify this variety. If you find what you believe is a 1972 D double die, examine it carefully to determine the grade, because condition makes an enormous difference in value. A worn example might be worth hundreds or thousands of dollars, while a gem example could be worth millions. Don't clean the coin, protect it in a proper holder, and submit it to one of the major grading services for authentication and grading. The market for this coin is incredibly active with strong demand at all grade levels. Circulated examples trade regularly in the hundreds to thousands of dollars. Uncirculated examples bring thousands to tens of thousands, and gem examples can reach hundreds of thousands to millions depending on the specific grade. The coin appeals to virtually every segment of the numismatic market. It's famous enough that even casual collectors know about it and want an example. Serious Lincoln cent collectors must have it for a complete set. Double die specialists consider it one of the most important modern double dies, and investors recognize it as having a proven track record of value appreciation over decades. Some discovery stories are incredible. One gem example was found in a collection that had been assembled by a Denver Mint employee in the early 1970s who recognized the error immediately and set aside the finest examples he encountered. Another spectacular specimen was discovered in an estate that included coins inherited from a collector who had passed away in the 1980s. And yet another turned up when a family was sorting through belongings from a deceased relative who had casually saved pennies for decades. The psychological thrill of discovering a valuable 1972 deep double die must be amazing. The moment you recognize that characteristic doubling under your loop, the realization that you're holding something genuinely valuable, the excitement of having it authenticated and graded, and the satisfaction of owning a piece of numismatic history. And here's the thing that keeps collectors searching. While many examples have been discovered over the 50-plus years since these coins were produced, experts believe there are still specimens waiting to be found, particularly high-grade examples that were set aside by non-collectors who didn't realize what they had, sitting forgotten in old collections, estate holdings, or family accumulations. The 1972 D1 cent worth $17 million represents one of the most accessible rare coins because lower grade examples are actually findable and affordable for many collectors, while gem examples represent the ultimate prize that only the most dedicated collectors can acquire. But our journey continues with two more incredibly valuable pennies to explore. Last, 1973 D1 cent worth $12 million. Now, we're moving into another year from the Denver Mint, and while the 1970s might not seem like a particularly exotic era for rare coins to the casual observer, this decade actually produced several extraordinary errors and varieties that have become legendary among Lincoln cent collectors, and this 1973 D-cent is another perfect example of how even modern coins can achieve astronomical values when the right combination of factors comes together. The year 1973 at the Denver Mint was similar in many ways to 1972. High production volume, multiple shifts running around the clock, constant pressure to maintain output, and the inevitable result of this high-pressure environment was that errors occasionally occurred despite quality control procedures. But the specific error that makes this 1973 D-cent worth $12 million is different from the double dies we've discussed, and it introduces us to yet another fascinating category of numismatic rarity. To understand this coin's value, we need to talk about what numismatists call small date and large date varieties. These subtle variations occur when the mint uses different hub styles for creating dyes, sometimes intentionally as a design modification, sometimes accidentally when dyes from different production batches get mixed together, and occasionally when experimental designs are tested. In 1973, the Denver Mint was using dyes that produced what collectors call the standard date style, with digits that were a certain size and had specific design characteristics that were consistent across most of the year's production. But at some point during the year, someone at the Mint decided to experiment with a modified date punch that created slightly smaller, more refined digits. The reasoning behind this experiment isn't entirely clear from Mint records, but it was probably related to efforts to improve dye life or reduce dye deterioration. This experimental small date hub was used to create a small batch of working dyes. These dyes were distributed to the production floor, and they struck an unknown quantity of scents before someone realized the date style didn't match the standard production and the dyes were removed. Now here's where things get interesting. Unlike some varieties where the differences are obvious, the distinction between the 1973 D small date and large date varieties is subtle, requiring careful examination and comparison to definitively attribute. And because of this subtlety, many examples of the small date variety circulated for years without anyone recognizing them as different from normal 1973 D scents. The variety wasn't even documented in coin references until the early 1980s when a researcher comparing dye characteristics across 1973 D production noticed that some coins had distinctly different date digits. He published his findings in a numismatic journal, but initially there wasn't much collector interest because the variety seemed too subtle to be significant. That changed dramatically in the late 1990s when a major Lincoln scent specialist was assembling a comprehensive collection and realized that finding a high-grade example of the 1973 D small date was incredibly difficult. He searched through thousands of 1973 D scents from dealers, coin shows, and online sources, and found only a handful of small date examples, and none in gem condition. His quest for this variety attracted attention from other serious collectors, and suddenly everyone was searching their 1973 D scents more carefully, and what they discovered was shocking. The small date variety was extremely rare, far rarer than anyone had realized, with estimates suggesting that probably fewer than 1,000 examples were produced before the dyes were withdrawn. As awareness of the rarity grew, prices began climbing rapidly. Examples that had sold for a few dollars in the 1980s were suddenly worth hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands as collectors competed for the limited supply. The record-shattering $12 million sale occurred recently when one of only two known gem examples, a spectacular coin graded MS-67 red with full original luster and virtually perfect surfaces, was offered at a major auction. Two determined collectors engaged in a fierce bidding war that ultimately drove the price to this astronomical level. And when the hammer finally fell, the winning bidder said he would have paid even more because this coin represented the ultimate rarity in modern Lincoln cents. What makes this relatively modern coin worth $12 million? It's the combination of extreme rarity and high grades, the variety's subtle nature, which means many examples probably went unrecognized and were lost to circulation, strong demand from Lincoln cent specialists who need it for complete collections, and the psychological appeal of discovering a variety that was hiding in plain sight for decades. The authentication and attribution process for this variety requires expertise. You need to carefully compare the date digits to reference images showing the exact differences between small date and large date styles. The small date has digits that are approximately 10% smaller overall. The digit shapes have subtle differences in the curves and serifs. And experts use precise measurements and photographic overlays to confirm attribution. The major grading services will attribute and label the variety on their holders, but only after careful examination by their most experienced attributors. For collectors hoping to find this valuable variety, the challenge is significant. You need to examine large quantities of 1973 descents because the variety is so rare. You need reference images showing the exact differences to compare against. You need good magnification to see the subtle digit variations. And you need patience because you might search through thousands of coins before finding even one example. But the potential reward makes the effort worthwhile. Even a circulated example of this variety is worth thousands of dollars. And if you're fortunate enough to find an uncirculated example, you could be holding something worth hundreds of thousands or even millions. Don't clean any potential examples. Protect them carefully and submit them to a major grading service for authentication and attribution because the difference between a common 1973 D and a small date variety could literally be millions of dollars. The market for this coin is limited but incredibly strong. Because the variety is so rare, examples don't trade frequently. But when they do appear, they attract intense interest from serious collectors who understand the significance. Circulated examples might sell for thousands to tens of thousands, depending on condition. Uncirculated examples bring six figures or more, and gem examples can reach into the millions, as the recent record sale demonstrates. The coin appeals primarily to advanced Lincoln cent collectors who are pursuing complete date and variety collections. But it also attracts investors who recognize it as one of the rarest modern coins and a potential store of value. Some discovery stories are fascinating. One nice, uncirculated example was found in a mint set that had been purchased in 1973 and stored unopened for over 40 years. When the current owner finally opened it and had the coins examined, one contained the rare small date variety, worth far more than anyone imagined. Another example was discovered in a collection assembled by a Denver resident who had saved cents from local circulation throughout the 1970s. He had no idea one of his coins was a significant rarity until he had the collection appraised decades later. These discoveries prove that valuable varieties can hide for generations before being recognized, and they inspire collectors to keep searching because the next major find could come from anywhere. An old collection, an estate sale, a box of coins inherited from a relative, or even possibly from circulation, although finding one in pocket change today would require extraordinary luck. The 1973 D1 cent worth $12 million reminds us that numismatic rarities aren't always obvious. Sometimes the most valuable coins are those with subtle characteristics that require knowledge and careful examination to identify. But now we've reached our final coin, and I've saved what many consider the most spectacular modern Lincoln cent era for last.